The X-70B Phantom class prototype, designed by Imperial Intelligence during the heyday of the Sith Empire to provide their elite cipher agents with the best mobile platform technology could provide. The design was considered to be decades ahead of anything else out there. Of course, such technology came at great cost, and the construction and maintenance of the X-70B is considered to be highly complicated. Only a few shipyards are likely capable of constructing these vessels in small batches, though due to the secretive nature of the vessel, none will admit to constructing them. Maintenance, as we said, is also an issue, and while cipher agents which operate these vessels are trained in the day-to-day maintenance, anything more complicated or invasive is generally done by Imperial Intelligence themselves, by the Fixer branch. The reasoning behind all of this is that not only does the X-70B have to carry the most advanced technology, be it weapons, protection, computing, engine, sensors, that's about everything, it also has to appear as a luxury shuttle in order not to draw any attention to itself, because it wants to be inconspicuous as possible, considering the nature of its missions. This means that all of the systems that are giving it the vessel the capabilities that it has have to be hidden away, and quite often, because they have to be hidden away in smaller compartments, have to be purposefully redesigned or even completely new designs made in order to fit within the X-70B's hull. All in all, it made for a very, very complicated vessel, as we said, but also for a very, very capable vessel. Now, before we go into any more detail, why don't we go ahead and take a look at the interior, which gives us a bit more of a perspective behind the design of the ship and also its capabilities. So here we are looking at the interior of the X-70B, starting out from the left rear of the ship as we're looking at it and moving to the bottom right. So we start off with a cargo bay, which also doubles up as a maintenance workshop and whatever else is needed. Far more utilitarian in its design than some parts of the ship, but clearly a cut above design-wise of your standard freighters and shuttles. Next to this, we find the aft access corridor, which leads to the hyperdrive, in the most aft section of the vessel. A large and finely tuned drive system that gives the X-70B its long legs and speed. Being unable to rely on refueling at every stop or two, and needing to be able to get in and out and quickly when the situation demands it. All in all, it is a very high-tech and efficient unit, but it does require a lot of fine-tuning. Now, in the final aft section, we find the crew bunks and escape pod. Place for 4 crew on board, though these are an optional choice as the X-70B can be operated by a single person. Most cipher agents, however, do tend to gather a small team, not only to help them during operations, but also to maintain the vessel itself. Moving forwards, as we move past the entry port, and also the astromech lift, which gives access for the astromechs to the outside of the vessel, in case of in-vacuum repairs, we finally enter the main area of the ship, known as the lounge. So let's take a look at this area in a little bit more detail before we move on. The ship's lounge is the high point of the ship's interior, and clearly a place where a lot of money has been spent, from the cut crystal glass to the Eldranian wood paneling and flooring. This place shows off wealth and comfort. With comfortable seating areas and a fully fledged bar, it is a place where one can relax and also conduct business. The smaller holo projectors provide a means to show off art, while the main unit in the center can display anything from operational data to acting as a large holo communicator. All in all, this area is not just there for appearance sake. Many missions cipher agents undertake will involve negotiation and diplomacy. Being able to conduct this on their own vessel gives them a place that's both safer and also provides them with a certain status towards their negotiation partners. After all, appearances matter quite a bit, and this lounge shows off a lot better of an appearance than meeting somebody in the local bar. Not to mention that the drinks on board this vessel will be tested daily for potions, as one can never be too safe. So, that is the lounge. clearly comfortable, luxurious in the design statement, a home away from home from anyone that operates this vessel. But just one part of the interior, and we're not just quite done yet. So let us continue and take a look at the remaining areas on board the X-70B. On the left side of the lounge when facing the ship, we find a fully fledged med bay with an operating table and quarter tank. The reason for its presence is being that both a high-end businessman, which is of course a bit of the cover appearances of the ship, and a cipher agent will want to have their own facilities to look after their well-being, considering the state of many local hospitals. Especially for agents, having the means to both keep themselves alive and also any other persons they need to keep alive, whether they're being allies or enemies they still need to interrogate, having a fully fledged medbay on board can be very critical to operations. On the other side, we find the main operations room. Now this is where the real work gets done. A safe space within a safe vessel. From here an agent can access the data archives of intelligence back on Drummond cars or any other secure storage. When you look at the appearances from any person wealthy enough and has connections, so they do not want anyone to be eavesdropping on their communications, whether they're being business or private related. And being part of this entire suite and communications equipment here, one can easily tap into the HoloNets as a whole, if they have the provided access and skills. It is not always a guarantee, but it can provide an incredibly and powerful source of intelligence for any operative. Now moving on through the lounge, we have one final corridor, which gives us access to the captain's quarters and bridge. The captain's quarters are large and comfortable, and provide another secure working area within the vessel, and also a place to store their own personal items, locked behind another door, instead of just another simple locker within the cargo bay or within the crew quarters. The quarters themselves are larger than one would expect from a military vessel, but this was of course done to keep up the appearances of this vessel being a luxury shuttle. So hence, larger quarters, very comfortable bedding, and some fine art on the wall. When we finally enter the bridge as our final area within the ship, we see that it's sandwiched between the armor plates on both the top and bottom. This means it's very well protected and it's quite unlikely that any hit will directly hit the bridge itself, but it does mean that the outside view is somewhat limited. On the bridge we find a total of 4 workstations, which can do anything from the piloting to electronic warfare. As said before, the ship can be operated by a single person, but efficiency will increase the more people are actually working on the ship at any given time, especially during tense situations, whether this is gathering data while remaining stealthy or in the combat operations. The ship's systems are so finely tuned and need to be kept within those narrow margins that it is a very, very demanding task to operate it. So the more people you have, the better spread out the load it is, the less likely mistakes will be made. So this concludes our little overview of the interior of the X-70B. So let us now finally talk about the details that make this ship really so special as a whole unit, and also why the design is considered by these days to be quite iconic, despite being relatively rare and not very commonly known about. Especially the real capabilities are still hidden, as most people still consider this to be just a luxury shuttle. We noted before that some of the ship's systems had to be modified or even designed from scratch to fit within the hull of the X-70B. The reason why the equipment was changed and not the ship itself becomes clear as we take a more closer look at the exterior. The design of the ship, in combination with the materials used and the coating applied to them, means that it is a very, very stealthy design, and most sensors will not be able to detect it, especially at larger ranges. It is important to consider that when the ship was designed, their cloaking systems, while in existence, were still in the fairly early prototype stages and tended to burn themselves out in a single use. Hence, stealth had to really come from the ship's design and not from any additional technology. Another important thing that we noted before regarding the hyperdrive was speed and efficiency. The same can be seen back in the sublight drives of the X-70B. The X-70B has one of the largest engines to mass ratios of ships within our class, with them also being very efficient and state of the art, which gives them this very unique purplish glow. This glow is also due to fuels being used being very highly refined. This of course comes at quite a high cost when purchasing fuel, and it also limits refueling opportunities, because such fuel is generally only available on more core worlds. This once again brings us back to efficiency, the need to be able to operate for longer periods of time without having the ability to refuel. Some other points to note are that the X-70B actually has flaps within the hull which assist her within atmospheric conditions, giving her an edge when entering a planet's atmosphere, something that most spacefaring designs don't really consider too much, as it is mostly an inconvenience going up and down and well, we're out of here and we're gone. However, because agents will quite often be landing outside of common places and might have to land in any weather conditions, having more control within atmospheric conditions is really appreciated. Another final point of note is the location of the entry port to the ship. It being on the side actually provides a double advantage. Number one, it reinforces the aspect of luxury, because most luxury liners will have you board from the side of the ship and not from the front or the rear, especially the rear being not considered to be very high end. The other thing is that it being beneath the wing, it gives you a feeling of protection from the wing, which is of course both psychological as well as a real very much advantage during a tactical situation, which is very much a consideration. And of course, speaking of tactical situations, let us take a look at the ship's weapon systems and how she performs when all else fails and she has to fight her way out to survive. Speaking of tactical situations, outside of having to fight your way out of a very bad situation, there are also missions that simply require the annihilation of a certain target, or more nicely said, the assassination or a removal or whatever hell term you want to use really. In order to do this, the X-70B was presumed to have to engage larger targets than herself. And while size-wise she is a heavy fighter, she is of course burdened by the fact that she is also an intelligence craft vessel that has to appear like a luxury shuttle, which does not make it very easy to give her the punch of a heavy starfighter. And then the requirement said, well, if you're going to engage larger targets than yourself, without any assistance because of the covert nature, she needs to punch above the weight of a normal starfighter, or even heavy starfighter. This brought the engineers to a few issues. While she had the armor plating already in place to the stealth nature of the alloys, and they provide quite decent protection, so that was alright, she would need, of course, deflector shielding. Well, the deflector shielding themselves was really not that much of a difficulty. It was simply a case of raiding the lockers of the Imperial Navy, which was known to pretty much generate and create the best shields that were available already, and there was not much improvement needed to be done, only to downsize the system to fit them within the X-70B. The weapon systems, however, were a bit more tricky. Of course, you had the standard 4 missile tubes, which were fed by a magazine capable of holding 100 homing missiles, which was really useful. I mean, firing salvos of 4 missiles, they could easily deal with lighter targets and in numbers with larger targets. But missiles are of course expendable and you don't always want to use them, and the primary weapon was still meant to be the laser cannons. Now, a normal heavy starfighter packs a pair of reasonably powerful laser cannons that will pack them a good punch that will in numbers allow them to seriously threaten larger targets. But numbers were not the luxury as the X-70B had, so the designers had to come up with an entirely new laser cannon, which would fit within the limitations of the ship, fit not only in size but within the power requirements, but also pack a punch that was actually several grades above what a heavy starfighter could offer. Credit where credit is due, they of course managed, this being the Empire. Failure is not an option, and they did not fail. And the weapons they created are absolutely devastating pair of laser cannons, being very powerful, very highly tuned, and totally destructive to anything that they will engage. The main downside being is that they are so finely tuned that it requires a near constant attention even during combat to maintain the tuning within these weapons. Because if they're getting misaligned or not getting fed the right amount of power or anything else, it could easily lead to catastrophic failure, which in turn can cause catastrophic damage to the ship itself. This being the concession of demanding very, very high firepower within a frame that's just doesn't have the room for it actually originally. The cannons being so specific designed for the ship and being so tricky to use, they have pretty much been delegated only to this ship, because normally a weapon system like this would be employed in other uses as well, because, well, if you get a very powerful new weapon system, you want a wider employment, but the system is just not practical enough for such applications. As a final note, some X-70Bs have been retrofitted with Proton torpedo launcher. A single launcher and a magazine of full torpedoes. So while there was space to be found in some corners within the ship to allow this system to be fitted, it is not a common practice, because it complicates an already very complicated design, and it is generally considered that proton torpedoes are not a requirement on the missions for the X-70B. And in fact, most X-70Bs that are outfitted with these are not operated by Imperial Intelligence, but by members of the SID order themselves. So that's an overlook at the ship's tactical systems and capabilities. Let's go ahead and take a final look at the ship itself, nice little bit of overview, and close this all off. So, the X-70B Phantom class prototype. Intelligence vessel, luxury shuttle, heavy starfighter, absolute pain in the ass to maintain, but so worth it. It can be easily said that the X-70B has been one of the more daring projects of Imperial Intelligence. The resources committed to designing, maintaining, operating these vessels has been quite large, but it's safe to say that it's been very, very well worth it, as these ships have been crucial in many intelligence operations, none of which are likely ever to see the light. And certain other of the vessels, since they've been used by the SID within the SID order, they themselves have grown to appreciate the design and the capabilities of this vessel. And while they would love to have more of them, production remains limited. The cost is just high, the complications that can arise with it is just great. And overall, as I said, the operational difficulties and costs are very, very high. Of course, over the many years that these things have now been in operations and continue to be likely for many years to come, considering just how advanced they are, it does mean that some of these have fallen into what's considered these days by SID Intelligence unlawful owners. However, SID Intelligence doesn't seem to be too concerned about doing anything about them. Pretty much a double reasoning there. Most of the people that are finding themselves owning these vessels without permission tend to have use for the Empire while being in operations of them, and also, frankly, most people just cannot maintain this vessel. So as a result, quite a few of them ending just being abandoned or even blown up due to improper maintenance, which pretty much solves the issue on its own. So you may think, of course, well, it holds a lot of classified technology, shouldn't they be going after that? And the reality is that most of the technologies that were designed originally within the X-70B are these days more common and more commonly used. The only main difference is that within the X-70B a lot of the systems are just a lot smaller and hence a lot more finicky than in other applications. Same could be said as well for the weapon systems, especially I guess for the weapon systems. They are just, while very, very capable, as we said, the complications and the tricky use of them is just makes them actually rather pointless outside of any other designs. So sure, maybe they could have been copied by now, but that's the reality. And with how many breaches there have been within Imperial Intelligence and Sith Intelligence, it's quite safely assumed that the designs are fairly well, at least in bits, already stolen. So maybe even the Republic SIS already has been constructing their own versions of these vessels. It's hard to say. In the end though, it has been a very, very worthy project, and these vessels continue and will continue to serve the Sith Empire for a long time to come. So that concludes my overview of the X-70B Phantom. I hope you enjoyed it. It's easily, I think, one of my favorite ships within the Star Wars universe, and especially within the Old Republic franchise, because it's just such a elegant design, and just the purpose behind it is just intriguing, to say the least, to me. Of course, within this overview I've been taking a few liberties here and there, because, well, it's Star Wars and not a lot is very much explained into detail, so I've put in my own assumptions. But I think overall I've been very, very true to the nature of the ship and the design. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it's been quite long and perhaps a bit rambly in places, but that's just how I am when we're talking about science fiction spaceships. I tend to go into them, and truly I would like to go into this thing far more deeper, but then you'd be talking hours, and nobody wants to watch that on YouTube, I trust, quite safely. So yeah, that was it. If you liked it, please give me a like. If you said that was absolutely annoying, terrible, awful and incorrect and all of those things, give me a dislike. In either cases, I would love to hear your feedback. I mean, I'm trying to improve. And as a final note, I do apologize for my voice and maybe my heavy breathing. I've been dealing with the flu for a couple of days now, and it's just being quite annoying, and also the reason why this video has actually been recorded in, I think, 6 or 7 different parts, just in order that I could make it through each part without going out in a loud coughing spree all the time, which I had to cut out, which is a bit annoying. Anyhow, that was it. Till next time, and thank you for watching.